evening, everyone. Thank you so much to our partners at WordPress VIP for giving me the opportunity to speak to you tonight. I'm honored to be here on behalf of the News Corp family of brands and our NewsPress program to speak to you a little bit today about our story. And like every good story, there's a beginning, middle, end. There are rough times, there's villains, there's heroes. And in our case, there is a happy ending, not like all stories, but ours thankfully is a good one. So my hope today is that I could share a little bit with you about NewsPress and how we built a community of best practices. And you can take that away back to your organizations, back to your teams, and build on that from there. So NewsPress is, as I mentioned, a global newsroom of community practices which obsesses on its journalists. They are at the forefront of everything that we do. Our newsrooms really drive our strategy, our day-to-day, and our livelihood. They're not faceless customers. These are people we deal with day in and day out. We've worked so hard to build relationships with them. They're the ones we have to answer to when things go wrong, and they're also the ones that say thank you when things go right. That's my favorite part of the story, not the latter. But however, we didn't always focus on our customers in this story. It was a bit of a turbulent time to get to this aha moment and realize that maybe our efforts were in the wrong place when we were going through our digital transformations and when we were building our strategy as a program. So it's important to know how we stumbled in order for you to be able to avoid that back at your organizations and within your teams. So NewsPress is an integrated set of authoring tools and services that we have available to our newsrooms to plug and play and use for their best to their best abilities. So we give them the set of tools and authoring systems to pick and choose what they want to tell their stories. So take this, for example, from Disney. Why reinvent the wheel if it's already wheeling? This is a very similar scene across many different stories that we're all very familiar with, I would hope. We basically try to do the same thing with components and systems and integrations. We give them the ability to use it and reuse it, and hopefully not customize it too much for their liking, because we know that also presents its own issues along the way. So why build a community? Why create a program around NewsPress and these ideals that we have? And what were we even trying to solve for? Everyone can take a Gutenberg and plug it in and use it for their newsrooms and customize it the way that they want to. But we realized we were facing three major issues at our organization. One, we had a very expanding workload across our newsroom. Journalists and reporters and editors are faced with demands of keeping up with engagement, keeping up with the times, really, and focusing on things that are not just storytelling anymore. So this forces them to really step out of their comfort zone, and the demand and the pressure for delivery is very high. So we needed a way to help ease that for them, which ultimately leads to difficulty of use on many of the tools. What ends up happening on individual teams is that they're so quick to provide a solution and a response to whatever that they're going through that it ends up creating a web and a sticky, intricate, as we saw in the Nielsen house, a very big, elaborate set of tools and systems that are actually very hard to build on and iterate on very quickly. And lastly, this really happens because they work in isolation. I think every newsroom is almost like its own state. It's almost like their own entity, and they forget that there's anyone else around them sometimes. And it takes an important, it plays an important role in tech debt, in being able to build bigger, better, faster, and also more cost-effective. So how does our program work? We have several different components, and I'm happy to go into more detail with you guys during Q&A or even after this talk. But very briefly, as I mentioned, we provide authoring and integrated editorial tools in one place. We have defined engineering standards and best practices as a corporation. We've established global content services such as metadata and tagging and Google Web Stories. We also have an operating model that follows on a global and a local level that has 3 tiers of engineering support provided to each newsroom based on their needs and based on the features and the problems that we're trying to solve, as well as a strategic partnership with WordPress VIP and Automatic. So our purpose is to really drive home these 4 things. We want to be very solution focused on any of the features or the items that we're building. The products, the technology should all be geared toward an ultimate end goal. We want to essentially build that collaborative community that I was talking about, and that's very critical in making sure that we don't have that tech debt that I mentioned, and making sure that we're not over-engineering or over-processing. And that leads to number 3. Everything we do should be standard and reusable. So we don't create that sticky web. So we don't create that heavy infrastructure that won't allow us to build better, faster, stronger, and more cost-effective. Lastly, this is the biggest one, is being a digital-first organization and working as in a digital-first mindset. We have a very heavy print organization that tends to translate their print workflow and their print day-to-day into a digital CMS. So it takes a lot as a community to break away from that mindset and to get everyone to think about, how can I just build the best story without having to do too much? This story sounds really nice, right? It sounds like we've got a lot of good stuff going for us. However, nobody bought it. Nobody liked what we were selling. We probably gave this same presentation I just gave 45 times to business units, to stakeholders. You know, it all sounded really nice on paper. We had our own funding. We had our own team. We had our own strategy. Nobody was really supporting us in any way. But our CTO at the time in June 2020, posed the question, why are we even funding this group if nobody's buying into it? Nobody wants to fund them. Nobody wants their services. I think all except one business unit was really excited about it. And it's like our smallest business unit, but it was really nice of them. It felt really good, but it wasn't enough. So what changed? We had to really introspectively look on what it was that maybe we were missing, because we were definitely missing something at this point. Funny enough, it just came down to 2 very basic things, focusing on the why, and at the end of the day, it wasn't really about us. So if y'all are familiar with Simon Sinek, this is a very, very basic concept with a lot of elaborate plots and twists and videos, and you can really spend hours on this, but I only have 7 minutes and 18 seconds left. What we took away from it is most organizations, or most people, end up thinking from the what to the how, and then later think about the why. And we learned that's because our stakeholders and our newsrooms and everyone kind of teaches us to think this way. They'll ask us to solve problems or bring us questions, and our immediate response is, okay, this is how we can fix it. Or I think this is what you're going through, and this is what I'm gonna do to solve it. So we end up solutioning before we've even really figured out, why do we need any of this? So when we started thinking about the why, it really grounded us in everything that we did. It was no longer just talk about, here's all that we can offer. It was, here's the reasoning why we can move this organization and why newsrooms really need us. Second, surprise, it's not about us. And I think that was part of the biggest problem as well. We made it about us. Here's all the great things that we could do. Here's all of the services that we can offer. Look at all these engineering teams that we have all over the world. Look at this, look at this, look at that. But at the end of the day, no one was listening to that. And that's because, really, in a story, the human mind responds to 7 universal points. You have a character who's presented a problem. They meet a guide who helps them get through this. They give them a plan. They give them advice. They call them to action to react to whatever it is that they're going through. And that ends up in success almost all the time. And it helps them avoid failure. This guide really moves them away from a cliff that they were about to walk off. And it's applicable to many great stories. Obviously, one of the greatest stories ever told of time. I hope nobody disagrees with that. Here's a perfect example. Again, back to Disney. We have Luke Skywalker, the hero in the story, who meets the guide Yoda to avoid the villain Darth Vader. He gives him a plan to become the Jedi Master, and he succeeds at the end, right? And he doesn't get corrupted by the dark side. So in this story, we had to think about who the hero was. And the hero was no longer the NewsPress program. The hero was a journalist, and we were just the guide. We were just here to meet them at the door and say, I think I've identified the villain. I think I know what the problem is. Let me present you with something that I think would help, and you tell me. Let me call you to action and inspire you to come up with the solution as well, as opposed to just handing it to you. And ultimately, our heroes, we hope, end in a successful ending. Sometimes it doesn't. Again, I always have to preface that because it's not all hunky-dory at the end of the day. But our job is to help them avoid failures and be that walkthrough for them. And as a sum, the whole is truly great. As a result, the whole is truly greater than the sum of its parts. Just looking across this portfolio, we went from one or two brands maybe caring about us to a whole suite that is very interested in our services, thankfully. Out of these brands, we have 50% funding now, which went from 0 to 50 in a couple of years, which is wonderful. So we went from being, almost being canceled to now being so self-sufficient that we're the most successful program at News Corp. We have done several amazing projects that have, really spiraled our success. One of them being Google Web Stories. So we've established Google Web Stories across our portfolio of brands. We've helped MarketWatch move out of a very old legacy tool that was really authoring all of their breaking news and moving that into Gutenberg. We're also working with the Times and the Sunday Times to move out of Methode, a legacy print system, into their first digital-first CMS using Gutenberg, and the list goes on. So all this to say, I think it's important that you tell the story in the way that your organization needs it to be told, and make sure you take the time and the diligence to identify who the heroes are and how to bring them the best success across the board. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Monica. All right, you guys know the drill?
Hi.
Hello.
When you're working with a brand that's not using NewsPress yet, and you just told us how you sort of bring them along and convince them this is for them, it's about them, it's going to help them do their job, what are some of the objections that they raise? What don't they like about using something structured kind of from a center of excellence approach? What do they think that they know better?
Yeah, people don't like something until they don't, right? So, nobody ever thinks they have a problem until you try to influence change. So no one thinks that they're having a hard time with their CMS or that they're going through turbulent times until you try to pull them away from their comfort zone. So I tend to find that it's really two things. One, it's stepping outside of a routine and a workflow that they've cemented, which is very hard to move them away from. And it's even more difficult across newsrooms when the type of content varies, because then that's impacted by speed of publishing and types of storytelling. So when you're cemented in that, it's really hard to get somebody to think outside of it and say, actually, maybe I don't need to do all of this to tell a great story. Maybe I can do less. And then I think the second thing is I always feel like when I have conversations across the newsroom is that people feel like maybe their jobs are at stake and they don't feel like they'll have as much to do at the end of the day, which is very sensitive for me because I have watched certain departments disappear because of some of the advancements that we've made in technology. We have sometimes whole photo departments that disappear because you can just drag and drop an image into Gutenberg and you don't need a whole production team sometimes to do it. So I'm very sensitive to that. People don't know where they fit in the change. And that's why putting them at the center of everything is important, because they are part of this change. It's not like we want to change and push them out of the way. This change has to happen and be inspired by them.
Any other questions? All right. Well, thank you, Monica.
I think we have one more. This light is so bright. Is this like how like the Kardashians feel? I'm like.
So in terms of editorial tools and input and user experiences, we've talked a lot about this, so I think it would be great for the room to hear about this too. How are you designing editorial tools to meet each newsroom, and how have you found the efficiencies in using NewsPress? So with one division or one brand, how are you leveraging tools in other places, and how are you making it easier to tell stories?
Yeah, it's a delicate balance, right? Because it's hard to develop for like 7 newsrooms at the same exact time. So an approach that we've been trying to take lately, and I think it's working, although I will say it's a little slower to delivery, is that we iterate a lot on one newsroom. We build it really, really well, and unfortunately, sometimes they become the guinea pigs in the experiment, and they have to really experience a lot of pain with us until we get it right. But they're willing to, because they know that their struggle is also going to benefit like 5 other newsrooms. Once we get it right here and we start plugging it elsewhere, adoption becomes easier. I think everyone then gets used to this. They get used to, okay, well, MarketWatch is figuring it out for us. We'll just wait till it's perfect there because we don't want anything that's broken anyways. So it plays around in one playground until that's great. We move it over. So again, this is part of the community of practice. Is we also have to get our newsrooms talking. We can't get them to just sit in isolation. So when we launch one thing on one newsroom, I know because I hear they immediately go to the next newsroom and say, hey, how was it? Is it working the way that we want it to? And they'll say like, no, it has its kinks, or no, it's got this. And they'll come back to us and then we hear about it. That's the community aspect of it.
Yeah. And have you found that when people actually listen to the other team, do they like
Yes.
say, okay, well, that's different than mine, but they'll take on the best practices from there?
Yes, and we make them aware that, hey, you want it like this, but 7 other brands have it like this. Can you explain to me why you need it this way? And like we force that conversation. We can't be complacent to overdevelopment either, because that really lands us in a lot of trouble. So I think we have to push those conversations. And in the end, sometimes they say, well, I don't know why I wanted it like that. And that's okay. Then we axe it. Move on.
Thank you.
All set?
Yes, thank you.
Thank you.